Hello. Welcome to our video series celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Pura Belpré Award. My name is Cecilia Cackley. I'm a writer for Latinxs and Kidlit and the children's buyer for East City Bookshop, an independent bookstore in Washington, D.C.
And I'm Sonia Alejandra Rodriguez, and I also write for the Latinx and Kidlit blog, and I'm a writer and educator in New York City.
The Pura Belpré Award, established in 1996, is presented to a Latina writer and illustrator whose work best portrays, affirms, and celebrates the Latinx cultural experience in an outstanding work of literature for children and youth. It is co-sponsored by the Association for Library Service to Children and the Young Adult Library Services Association, divisions of the American Library Association, and the National Association to Promote Library and Information Sciences to Latinos in the Spanish-speaking, an ALA affiliate.
The award is named after Pura Belpré, the first Latina librarian at the New York Public Library. As a children's librarian, storyteller, and author, she enriched the lives of Puerto Rican children in the U.S. through her pioneering work of persevering and disseminating Puerto Rican folklore.
Today, we have two amazing Belpre award-winning authors with us to talk about their work. Donna Barba Higuera is the author of the Pura Belpré honor book, Lupe Wong Won't Dance, as well as the picture book, El Cucuy is Scared Too, and the upcoming middle grade book, The Last Cuentista. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And Yuyi Morales has won the Pura Belpré Medal for illustration 6 times, most recently for her book, Dreamers. Her next picture book, Bright Star, will be published in September. Thanks for being here, Judy.
It's a pleasure.
Let's go ahead and get started. So our first question has to do with the Belpre Award. So we're celebrating the 25th anniversary. And so maybe I'll throw it over to Donna first. What does this award mean to you, and why do you think it's so special?
You know, I think when I first got the call that I'd won the award, it caught me completely off guard because it's not something that first of all, that I was ever expecting, but then the weight of what this award meant just kind of fell on me, and I, collapsed into tears. But the reason that is because I think as a child, I always saw books that didn't represent kids like me. There was always kind of this default character that was more so like the kids around me in my town and nothing like me. And so when I was writing this book, I wasn't writing it with the intention of writing a book that was for a child like me. I was just writing what I knew and for my own children. So to have it acknowledged that these characters matter, to me is like, okay, there's going to be a kid now who can pick up a book and go, wow, even though this character might not be exactly like me, it's sort of like me and not all the other kids around me and all the other stories that are being told. So I think it's a little bit of belonging, and because books are a safe place for kids to read, it's this little secret that you have when you read a book and go, I belong, I'm like that character. And so that the book was acknowledged for that it's just so heartfelt. There's no way to put into words what it means to win an award like this that is for writers and characters like ourselves.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I saw your speech when you accepted the award, dedicating it to your family and your children. It's just so beautiful. And yeah, definitely agree. Judy, what about you? What makes this award special, and what does it mean to you?
I won my first Pura Belpré award a while ago. It was in 2003. And I think that a lot has happened, even in my understanding of what the Pura Belpré means. Because when I got it the very first time, it was an absolute surprise. And I really didn't have a context of where this award came from. And little by little, I understood. But first I understood it because of the effect it had in me. First, it gave me validation. Because at the time, I just felt like I was just another woman, another brown woman with stories to tell that I couldn't recognize whether I had an audience. whether my stories were valid, where someone was going to connect with them. I was just doing something that felt very necessary to me, because I was telling stories to my son. I was making those stories that he was not going to get from anywhere else. He wasn't, we weren't back at in my country with my family. Well, he would hear those stories, and here in the United States, everything else was so different, and I couldn't necessarily relate to it. So when I made my stories, I was making them for him so that he will know, like, the colors of the place where we come from, or the food, or the relationships that we have with family, and how we make celebrations and happy birthdays and all of those things. So when I received the news that I was being awarded the Pura Belpré, it was just like this call that was telling me that I was not alone in this, that I wasn't just putting a book out there that fell into an empty void. It's like someone was receiving it, someone was reading it, and someone was shedding a light and saying, look, here is this book. Maybe nobody else has seen it, but we are seeing it, and we are putting our voices out there. One of the things that the Pura Belpré does is that they are fighters, they are warriors, they are bringing all this attention to books that otherwise we probably wouldn't know about, because they are not in the mainstream. They are not being, maybe now more and more we can see books made by Latinx people and for Latinx readers. Maybe we have a little more visibility, but that's something that has been fought for. And the Pura Belpré has done that. There is a very good reason for that award to exist, because if it wasn't for the Pura Belpré, many of these books, extraordinary books, wouldn't be seen. We wouldn't even know that they exist. And when they are giving the Pura Belpré a book like one that Donna might have done or I might have created, they are not really giving us the award. They are giving this award to a big population, especially children, who know now that if they embark in creating books, there is someone who is going to support them. There are readership for that. So they are actually giving this award to all the future writers and illustrators, all those children that are right now learning and reading our stories, to know that they one day can tell the story, and their story will be valid. Their story will be celebrated. Their story will be read. Their story will be seen, and we will all applaud to it. So when I think of the Pura Belpré and what it does, I know that it has very little to do with us as authors and illustrators right now. The reach of the Pura Belpré is universal. It's like giving us really like the sun and the stars, so that we know that the work that Latinx people are doing is part of the constellation that will be shining upon our children. So I can never say enough about the Pura Belpré.
That's beautifully put. Like, and the impact that it has in the community, right?
I'm like getting emotional just listening to her.
So Pura Belpré was a librarian dedicated to children and storytelling, and puppets, which I know is your thing, Judy, as much as it is mine. It's one of my favorite things about her. Why do you think it's important for today's children to have stories about the Latinx experience told by Latinx authors? I don't know, Judy, you want to go first this time?
Well, going back to when I just came to the United States, I remember reading a lot of books that you spoke about the Latinx experience, especially like they will weave words like tortillas and burro and fiesta. And then that kind of meant that it was made for readers like us, but they had nothing to say about the real experience of you know, coming from places where we come from or our family experiences, although they are so diverse. But the reason why those books weren't telling me about experiences like mine is because they weren't made by people that had those experiences. They were made by people who maybe traveled to Mexico, maybe had a friend who was, you know, from Mexico, Latinx person, and because they were authors who were trying to tell the stories and they could take them from everywhere. But the connection that we can feel to those stories is not real, because they don't really speak about the things that we go through, about what it means, for example, to come to a country like the United States and not be measured by the idea that people have of who we immigrants are, for example, right? So then you come to the United States and you still hear those stories where you, by arriving to the United States, you finally reach the place where you are gonna be somebody, now, where all of your problems are fixed. If you come from a Latinx country, you know that arriving to the United States is just the beginning. I have someone who is selling colchones right now. So when Pura Belpré starts telling the stories that come from her experience and the experience of working with children that come from places like us, with our experiences, then we finally knew that our stories were valid, that they were as valid as the stories that we were reading here. Like, you know, there are wonderful books that don't talk about us. And Pura was telling us that our stories were important, that our stories, and for us to be the protagonists of our own stories, was an important thing, that we could applaud to ourselves and to our experiences and be proud of them and be the heroes of our own stories, rather than having to admire it and want it to be someone else. I don't know if that happened to you, Donna, and also both of you, where when I was growing up, I grew up in Mexico. I didn't grow up in the United States, but the literature that we were receiving and everything in the media, what it told us is that we were not enough. And that if we wanted to be something of value, someone of value, we will have to be like other people. Maybe even have blonde hair and blue eyes and speak another language and have a different kind of education, or even be just someone who we were not. And what Pura was doing, and that's what the legacy gives us, is to understand that we don't have to be someone else to be of value, to be worth of having our stories listened to. So if I know that there are a lot of people who might be doing that work already, but for her, it took that courage of putting her stories by telling them, but also by writing them, putting the bricks down so that people like Donna and me and all of other authors and illustrators who are working now can have that space where we can also tell how special we are.
So, you know, going off of what Judy said, I think that growing up, again, the stories weren't in books form. They were not there. When I would hear stories, though, from my grandmother or my aunt, and that was what was heartfelt. And my grandmother had so many stories of her family, and it was an oral tradition. My grandmother stopped going to school. I think she was 11 or 12 and worked in a hotel because she had to help support her family. But she had these amazing stories and she would tell them to me. And there were things that, you know, just seeped out of the walls of her house, the culture and the food and the music. But then there was a point when someone would come to the door, it all shut off. And it was, you know, that is sacred within these walls. And so it sent a message to me growing up that those were stories I couldn't share with the world, that the world would judge me, and that I wasn't allowed to speak Spanish in public, or, you know, even reading books. I'm like, wow, these are so different from the stories that my grandmother tells me, and what happened in her family history. She had diaries that she would read in Spanish to me when I was a child. So I grew up hearing Spanish, but I can't write it, or I'm learning to read better. And I have to tell you, Soñadores was one of the first books I read in Spanish where I'm like, I can understand this, and I'm reading all of it. So I'm still learning, because I have that oral and, you know, the tradition that I heard, but the stories weren't in print form. And so when I started writing, I automatically wrote the opposite. I wrote what I had read, because I thought that was how I was supposed to write. And so I have so many picture books and novels and things that I wrote that I hope will never see the light of day, because they're not who I am. And then when I started writing with my own voice and that of my family, and I let those stories out, it felt very vulnerable, and I was very afraid. And I showed it to people who I knew wouldn't understand all of it. And it was scary. And yeah, there were times when I would have to, you know, take a deep breath and swallow and say, I'm not going to say anything back, because people didn't understand, or I felt they judged my words. But it didn't stop me. I just kept writing and kept going. And those are the stories now I'm finding are resonating with people, because even though my story may be different from so many other Latinx kids, and it's, you know, mine is Mexican culture, which is not all, as we know, not all Latinx cultures. They're so varied, but kids understand and feel the family, and, you know, the smells of a home, and the food, and the interactions that we have. And when you can make yourself vulnerable, readers will see that and say, I can see myself in that. And that's how people connect. And if you're not writing what makes you both feel vulnerable, but what you love and what is part of your family, people can't connect. And I think that when I started reading past Pura Belpré winners too, I was like, I get this now. And of course we all say, oh, I wish I had that when I was a kid, but we didn't. And so now I do, which is why I'm reading picture books in Spanish, and I'm getting it now. And it just gives me so much hope for kids who are going to be growing up in the United States and being able to see and connect with those things. And of course, in other countries as well, where they can read books about, you know, kids, American kids who have cultures similar to theirs. But like Judy said, you know, understanding that what they saw before in print, if that was the only narrative that they saw, that is not always true, and that there are other kids like them out there.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love what I'm hearing from both of you, Donna and Judy. I'm hearing words like empowerment, hope, right, possibility. I love, Judy, what you said about like that Belpre laid the bricks for like children to see themselves as heroes, right? Donna, you like think taking these stories and like giving them to your inner child, and how much this award has done for the community. Donna, this next question is for you. How has Judy inspired you or influenced your work, right? Because we've paired these conversations with like current Belpre winners with past winners. So how has Judy inspired your work, Donna?
Well, I will say when I first read Dreamers or Soñadores, there was, I don't want this to come off as wrong, but it almost felt like if I as a child had read that, because of what I saw around me, I would have thought, this is taboo. She's talking about, she's, you know, saying what I'm thinking about the magic of language and color and cultures and books and what it can bring, and the fear, you know, the fear that she has for her and her child coming to a new country. And those were things that were stifled within me and my family. We didn't talk about it. It was just kind of this unspoken thing. And so for me, I felt, wow, you know, if someone else can make themselves vulnerable and talk about this experience that was very scary, and look at what beauty came of this, from you turn a page and the colors just pop and become magical. And if that can be done, then I'm not an illustrator, but if I can do that in words, I'm going to try. And so, but if I had never seen that, I think you know, part of that, it's not just Juji's book, but hers in particular, that made me realize I can do this, and I can do this in words, and it's going to be really hard. But if I dig into the places that maybe are the most sad or the most hurtful or painful for me, then the stories will be richer, and they will have more of an impact, where kids can read them and say, okay, I can do this too. And I can write and have hope for the future. And so, yeah, I think that looking at all of those books, and Juji's work in particular, it transformed the mind of a writer into knowing I can do something more.
That's awesome. I love that. So both of you have done lots of different things, which I think is one of the coolest things about both of your bodies of work, which obviously continue to grow. Juji, you know, you've written books that are both personal experiences and memories, like Dreamers, Soñadores, but also books about lucha libre with Niño, and, you know, humor with Señor Calavera. And now you're moving, you have a book coming out that is very, very focused on nature and the natural world. And Donna, you started off with this absolutely hilarious, pitch perfect middle school realistic title. But later this summer, we're going to get an absolutely incredible sci-fi exploration. So I'm curious from both of you as to how you decide which direction you want to go in next. How do you decide what is the next story that you want to tell? Maybe Juji, you want to go first this time.
That's a good question, because I don't know that I can clearly identify what my next book is going to be, because and at least in my case, books come to me as life comes to me too. When I wrote my first book, which is Just a Minute, a trickster tale and counting book, and I was thinking about that book when you were mentioning, Donna, about how their stories didn't feel valid sometimes, and you were afraid of people telling you, oh, your story, we don't understand it, or it is wrong. I felt like I have to be somewhat brave and maybe even a little crazy to imagine that a story like Just a Minute was gonna have a place, because especially when I first wrote it, I got a lot of comments and even compliments about things like the art, but not about the story, because the story, they felt that it was just scary, it made no sense, and that children were going to be afraid of a story that had a skeleton. And, you know, eventually it found a place, and it was even awarded the Pura Belpré. But this idea, and especially being reflected from other people, that this book might be scary or not what they will sell, you know, booksellers. Even an editor told me, we will never be able to sell this story to children. And for me, the story was important because it was a story where I was putting everything that I was feeling at the moment, which is that I was deeply homesick, that I miss my family, I miss everything that was familiar to me, and without me knowingly, completely consciously, I was surrendered myself with all the things that I missed at that moment, that I wanted with me and I didn't have them. I put them on the pages, I put them on the blank paper, and then I had it. Then it was with me, the colors, the cake, the tamales, all of those things. I put them there in the page. So then finally they were next to me. And as that one is grown from being homesick, then there is Niño Wrestles the Wall and Rudas, which come from this exploration of fears. And how do you battle fears? And how do a child battles fears? But I need to confess that every time I finish a book, even though I don't know what it is about, I realize when I look back that I always see like it was just me trying to solve something. It is me, whether I am Niño or Señor Calavera or someone else, it is still my child, Yuyi, trying to solve something that's still happening in my life. And then when Dreamer comes, same thing happens. Then Trump has just been elected, and I have no idea how to counteract that energy that is happening, where immigrants are being labeled, where someone like me or my child or other children are being described with words that take their humanity away. And because I don't know what to do in those instances, I make a book. And in the case of Dreamers, that it was that exploration. How do I, as an immigrant, tell who an immigrant is, who this immigrant is, and how that giving me that permission allows, hopefully, also other people to know that they have the right to tell who they are and tell their stories without no one else trying to label them or describe them. So every story that comes to me, I realize it is an attempt to resolve something that I don't know how to resolve yet. Bright Star is also coming from that place. It's having that question that we see that terrible things are happening to children, especially in places like the borderlands. And we have children who had been abused and traumatized by this experience. And yet we are supposed to make books that let them know that they are gonna be okay. They just have to let it go, maybe find a therapist, I don't know what, you know, and that they will be wholesome again. I have no answer for that. The only thing I can do is make a book and see what I can find. And I know that a book is not an answer, but making a book, it is the process of finding many answers, not even one, but many of them. And because I know that, that's why I value so much the work that we all make together, because it is only by the many authors and illustrators and the many stories that are being made right now that we will find an universe of answers for those questions. One book by itself is not gonna do it. We have to be making many of these books. Then we have to be telling many of these stories, and we have to hear all of these voices, because the answer is not in one author, as is not in one single book, even if it wins the Pura Belpré. It is in all the other books that exist, so that that book can have a visibility. We are there because there are all these voices pushing up and telling so many stories. And the more stories that we tell, the more answers that we are gonna find for our questions. I know I am finding a lot of answers in every book that I
read. What was the question? Just joking. I got totally lost in all she was saying. So I think for me, like Judy, the ideas come in daily life. I can be driving and daydreaming and an idea will come to me. I can hear something on the news. The book I'm working on right now, I heard something on NPR and it just sparked a tiny idea that just took off, and now it's a tornado whirling and I have to try to bring it back together in some order. But again, like Judy said, a lot of times, but I don't even know when I'm writing a book until it's done. And I'm like, oh, wow, I was digesting some things while I was writing this. And this was me trying to get something either out of my system or process something that I didn't know that, you know, my mind was disturbed by, or trying to, I think the world around us right now is very scary. I think for kids, it's very scary. And so if I'm trying to digest these ideas and the things that I'm hearing, when I put them in a book, like Judy said, maybe it's just that one thing, and maybe it's just 1 or 2 kids out of 10 that might read it, and it will, they'll connect with what I was trying to work on by writing this, and it will help them in some way. And again, that's what books do for us. They help us digest things as writers. And I think in turn, if we can connect with the readers, it helps the readers digest things. You know, the idea for Lupe Wong Won't Dance just came over a dinner conversation with my kids, and my daughter just didn't feel empowered at school because she was going to have to square dance in PE. And I was like, why are they still square dancing, first of all? And she would, you know, she had to dance with a boy. She was young, and she was going to have to hold his hand, and things that, you know, for her, especially in middle school, it's such an awkward age, felt strange to her. And I, you know, kind of in the mom defense thing, I'm going to write a character who has a voice, and it just came about through the character, and the book just took off. Once you have a character in mind, for me, they start experiencing life, and Lupe started experiencing things that I had experienced in my life. So that's how that book came about. El Kukui was something that I thought I was the only kid with an El Kukui when I was little. And it was just a threat that my grandmother or aunt would use to say, okay, eat this, or El Kukui will get you, or go to bed, or El Kukui will come get you. And so as an adult, it was a writing prompt. It said, take the thing that scared you the most as a child and make it adorable. And it just was an instant pop into my mind. Oh, I'll write about El Kukui. And so the book is not just about El Kukui, but the other fears that we have as children, starting, you know, moving to a new town or place, you know, worrying about starting school, about the way we speak or the way we dress, those sort of anxieties. And I kind of teamed them together with this fear of El Kukui. And then I found out it's not just, you know, I go, oh, okay, it's Mexican culture. There are other people have El Kukuis. It's not just Mexican culture. It's so many other countries have versions, El Cuco and La Cuca. But but again, it was just one little thing that came to mind. And when I wrote before, a lot of the books I wrote, I was trying to force a narrative, or I'd say, okay, I'm going to write a book about this, this, and this. And then I would start writing, and they never felt rich or heartfelt. And with The Last Cuentista, it was, again, just me pondering something one day, you know, just going through life and going, what would happen if, you know, Earth was destroyed and I had one thing I could take with me into another planet? What would that be? And for me, it was story and folklore and the oral tradition from my grandmother. And what if society didn't value those things once I got there? What if, you know, they did kind of, I think, and I realized it's me digesting what I feel already, is that what if these stories that I have are not valued? Or if somebody reads some of the stories that I heard, they go, that's really weird. Kind of like what Judy said about her first book, people not really understanding. And I'm still afraid. I'm afraid that people will read this book and it's woven with folklore and say, that is really bizarre. But growing up in the United States and knowing Mexican folklore, it doesn't fit the traditional European fairy tale at all. And I think it scares people a little bit. They go, wow, that's kind of creepy, but it feels comfortable to me. And so I'm going to do it anyway. And maybe it won't be received as maybe I hope it would be, but I'm not writing for everybody. I'm writing for the kids who will read it and go, oh, okay, I get that. And I understand that. That creepy's okay with me.
I have to say, I'm looking forward to your book. I really, really, I want to read it. And I know that it's going to be, like you say, that is going to be right for maybe people who are not the mainstream, maybe the ones that are ready for a little, something a little different, a little, I don't know what, but that probably would feel familiar to a lot of us. And it is okay that it's like that. I was thinking, as you were saying, that maybe what I'm doing is a little wacky, and I'm thinking something that my therapist told me a while ago, and he said, like, well, and remember that your wackiness is beautiful. and I think that's what we have to remind ourselves, that some things might feel like maybe they're pushing a little bit, especially for a community or a readership that might not be ready for it. But I think that we have to remember that our craziness, nuestra locura, is very, very beautiful. And that's what we are putting out there. We are putting, like we mentioned before, our vulnerability out. And that's one of the most precious and sacred things that we can give. You were also saying how you were taught some of those things needed to be concealed and you don't show it. But when we open up and we let those things come out, we realize just how powerful they are. So I want to read your book.
Thank you. It's
Yeah,
coming out
awesome.
soon.
Yes, I'm excited for that book too. I love both of y'all's answer to that question. Judy, I love how you said that the story comes to you as life comes to you. That's just like a very author craft way to answer, right? And Donna, you provided some of those examples too, right? Listening to your children, listen to the radio, the idea just kind of sparks and the story is born. So the next question is about like picture books. Both of you have picture books. Donna, you made your debut like picture book recently. And so I want to talk about like picture books in particular and what this type of book can do that other books can't, right? Such as middle grade or YA. And so maybe we'll start with you, Yuyi, because we have a follow-up question, right? So what can picture books do that other books can't? And can we expect a longer format from you in the future?
Yeah, actually, yes. I've always been an admirer of, not necessarily of longer formats, but just different ways of telling stories. And I always want to explore how else can I tell a story. You know, I sometimes tell children, like, can you imagine yourself telling a story maybe with an empty page and just nothing in the page, and maybe then you dare to put a line or a dot or something. Can we tell stories like that? And I believe that we can. And that's how I see picture books. I see picture books as these spaces where the narration, the story is told in so many different ways. So we think that it is told by the words and by the pictures, and there is much more there that helps us tell the story. The way that that the cover does something to you and gives you a little of information so that you go inside. The way that every image leads you to turn the page and see what you find. The composition and where you place different objects and the sizes tell you a story. The colors tells you a story. So what I always think of picture books is that it has many devices to tell you the story and many different languages. And here I'm also going to implement something that comes up a lot, which is, do you tell the story only with one language? Do you tell it only with English or only with Spanish? And what I always say is, I understand the picture book as made of many different languages. And it is not only whether you choose one or other, English or Spanish or something else, but you have the language of the empty space. You have the language of the turn of the page. You have the language of the colors. You have the language of the situations, the symbols. Like the picture book offers you a space where you can use everything you tell to have a story. If you are gonna use your elbows to make something into the page, then so let it be it. You might introduce something that feels like you are singing or you are dancing. It all has a space in the picture book. And that's why I love it so much, because it is a place that feels to me unbound. It's infinite. You can do whatever you want. And to me, it gives me this opportunity to experiment and see what happens when you do something with a page. And one of the things that excites me is to find out how children can use the spaces of the picture book to create. That's always inspiring.
That's awesome. What about you, Donna? What has a picture book as a format provided for you?
So, as I said, I'm not an illustrator, but when I'm writing, I have ideas formed in my mind of how I imagine it going, which typically it's very literal for me. And then when I get an illustration back from an illustrator, I'm like, oh, wow, not only was I completely wrong, this illustrator took my words and made it exponentially better. So with El Cucuy is Scared Too, it's illustrated by Juliana Perdomo, and she's in Bogota, and she she told me she had El Cuco, and she had a cousin who would just scare her when they would have sleepovers with El Cuco. And so when I got the first illustration back, I was like, wow, your El Cuco looks exactly like my El Cucuy, but my El Cucuy didn't have a hood. Hers has this cute little hood. I'm like, you actually made him even more adorable. But I think that, like Judy said, just with the change of an angle on the face or a line, you can impart fear and emotions and happiness and hope and things that are difficult to do with words. And through a picture, a child can see that, not just the words and connect with those, but the images, and say, I feel like that character because I can see the look on his face, and I have felt that way. And so while like I said, with Juji's book in particular, the colors, it's probably, I will say, and maybe I didn't notice as a child, I'm sure that there were books that, like, colors, there were changes and I didn't even realize it, but it was the first time I looked at something and said, wow, look at the colors pop, and this is showing this, I can see in those colors hope and life, and that imagination and where their journey is going to go. And for most books, I never saw that before, just in that. So for me, though, even though I have a very flat image in my mind of what my words are, I can't, I'm sure Juji thinks in illustrations. I can't, I think in words. And then when I see the illustration, it just blows my mind.
That's awesome. We actually will have a spotlight interview with the illustrator of El Cucuy is Scared Too coming up on Latinx and Kidlit, so keep an eye out for that. I'm not exactly sure when it's posting, but we are very fortunate to have that work out. I love what both of you say, and it is very different. And there's such a wide variety of experiences when you're working in picture books, because some people do write the words but not do the pictures. Some people do both. And then you have artists who only do the pictures and haven't actually written the text. So there really are, that sort of sense of being unbound, infinite possibilities in the format. And I probably read more picture books than pretty much anything else, just as a bookseller. And there are there are a lot of them every year. And it's always interesting to see the choices that people make, the trends that emerge, you know, whether that's color scheme, whether that's art style, whether that's story style and the kind of stories, or an animal. You know, one year we'll have everything, but he's writing about Yetis. And then the next year, like, okay, everyone loves llamas. But it's always a journey. So I want to go back to the last Cuentista briefly because I'm lucky I have read it. And and I have to apologize to your publicist, Donna, because she's been getting increasingly frantic text messages from me being like, what is happening? I'm so scared. Or just, I can't believe that happened. Because it's really amazing and it makes you feel a whole lot of feelings, or at least it made me feel a whole lot of big feelings. But Dreamers, Juju's book Dreamers, comes up repeatedly in the last Cuentista. It's amazing. It's really cool now. We do have a lot of writers, particularly in middle grade, who are writing books that call back to each other, right? Like, you see middle grade writers who are referencing books by, their friends, or, you have a character who's like, oh, I'm, Carrying Them All Unbound by Said. And so it was really neat to read it and be like, oh, wait, I know that book. That's a book. So I would love to know a little bit more, Donna, about, first off, if you don't mind, for all of our listeners, telling maybe a little quick bit about what the book is about, and why you decided to make Dreamers that motif, for lack of a better word, throughout the story.
Well, the book is about a girl, Petra, who is leaving Earth with her family. Her parents are scientists, and they're chosen to, on one of 3 ships, they can leave to terraform a new planet. And on this journey, they get to download information, something that will make them valuable to society when they arrive. And of course, Petra wants to be a storyteller like her grandmother. Not autobiographical at all, but she discovers that that's not valued. Being a storyteller is not what society is going to value in the future. And so she's heartbroken, and she thinks that that won't happen for her. When she arrives, she finds that society has indeed changed drastically. Humanity has changed. People's memories have been wiped. And so no longer do people have no memory of Earth. She can't find her family. There are only a few children left, and they've all been reprogrammed, so they don't remember Earth and or the things that made them human, like empathy and love. And so Petra does have memories of story and her grandmother, the stories her grandmother told, and she was able to get somebody, went rogue and downloaded memory books to her mind. So she tells stories to the kids to try to remind them of Earth and their humanity. In the book, her brother carts around this antique book, because this book is set in 2062, and he carries around this book with a tattered cover, and it's put into a vault for safekeeping on the journey. And when I originally wrote this story, I didn't know what that story would be. When I started writing this, I had no idea what book I would use. And it was just a placeholder. I used Frederick the Mouse from Leo Leone. And I was like, okay, there's a mouse as the character, and it has the same ideas of being a dreamer. But then when I read Juju's book, I'm like, oh, this is it. And it was one of those goosebump moments where the book isn't just about, for this little boy, it's not just about his favorite book, but it also symbolizes people who travel, whether it's to a new country or a new planet, and the fears that they take, but also the hope. And so it had to be there. And when I put that book, I said, okay, gosh, I hope she agrees to letting me use this book, because when I first wrote it, there's a scene, it's a flashback scene where she's laying in bed with her brother, and all she sees is the spine of the book, and the mother's eye is looking down watchfully and lovingly. And I don't even think I said the title of the book until later. But it was so I decided purposely that I wanted to show the book first and what it symbolized than just blurting it out. And once I did that and it made these appearances later, it was the power of story and how this book that Judy wrote, we can take it far into the future and it will still have that power. And the words, even a few words read back to this boy who has maybe lost his memory, spoiler alert, that it can remind us of, just those few words can remind us of love and hope and what makes us human. And those are things we hold so deep within us that, oh my gosh, I just realized something, like the things that make us forget, like what the narrative that we're told, it can't be wiped away, because in this case, and I think I just realized why I wrote this, that her reading this story to her brother is symbolic of people not being able to take story from me, and how words they're going to find their way back into our novels and stories that we write. So once I put that in place, it was magical for me. And I think the character Petra and her brother had probably the same reaction that I did when I read Juji's story. And so while, you know, my story in itself wasn't about this book in particular, it showed how you can take a book and it can be something you read as a child and you can take it far into adulthood or into the future, and it still has the same power.
You know, I do have como dices en inglés, goosebumps, I don't know. La piel chinita, goosebumps.
Oh yeah.
Chinita de
My grandma said chicken skin.
Exactly. Yeah, we say la piel chinita o la piel de gallina. Just listening to how you create a story where you give all this power to the memory of storytelling, because you are recognizing in a book something that is so powerful, which is precisely that we are shaped by our stories, that our stories propel us forward, that if there is something that will always help us, is to remember where we come from so that we know our way. And I think that we all do that with our stories. You know, when we are writing them, it's because we recognize how powerful they are and they are going to take us somewhere. And by you putting it so clear in the story that you wrote, I also feel very honored that you have used my book for such a thing. And I think that what it does is a circle, even though you are referencing my book to tell you a story somewhere where I didn't know when I wrote my book. I know that now it was referencing your storytelling as well. So I'm very grateful.
Thank you.
Awesome. So I think we're just about at the end. We want to say thank you so much to both of you for being willing to participate in this conversation, for your incredible insights. This has been really a privilege to be part of and to listen, and be part of the conversation.